Good evening and welcome to the Courtauld Research Forum and to the first of our Renaissance seminars for this academic year. We are still online, but this is in fact the last time this seminar will meet purely online. Going forward, we shall meet again in person at in the research forum at Berlin Square, although our events will also be live streamed if you can't come in. Although I really do encourage you to come in henceforth. Discussion is so much more lively when we're all together in one space. Before I go on to introduce our speaker for this evening, can I just advertise the next speaker in this series, which would be Stefano De Bosio, speaking on the 11th of November, as I said, in the Research Forum at Berlin Square. And he'll be talking on borderlands, cross-cultural encounters in the Alps around 1500, and the production of place. We have a rich program going forward through the rest of the academic year, but I'll tell you more about that when we meet next in November. I should also like to signal to this particular group another cluster of seminars to do with sacred traditions and the arts, which we do together with King's. When we meet this term on the 6th of December, David Exsurgeon will be giving a paper on his research into altarpieces, which might be of interest to you. But now on to the business of this evening. I can see from the number of people who are joining this meeting that our speaker's reputation precedes him in such a way that it's really unnecessary for me to introduce him or to say a huge amount. Vincent de Levin, as I'm sure you all know, is a curator at the Louvre, which he joined in 2006. He is now conservateur en chef de patrimoine in the Department of Painting at the Louvre, where he takes special care of the 16th century Italian paintings, which is, as you would expect, his particular area of expertise. He's worked on exhibitions and their accompanying catalogues, both individually and part of a team that stretch across the Italian peninsula from the Veneto, from Titian Tintoretto Veronese down to Tuscany in the form of Baccio Bandolelli, but he's probably best known to all of you for his work and his expertise, so his work on Leonardo da Vinci. He's going to be talking to us tonight about the show that opened in October 2019 on Leonardo at the Louvre and closed just before we were all locked up in our homes. But I'd also like to remind you that he curated an earlier exhibition around the St. Anne, just after its restoration, the St. Anne, the ultimate masterpiece by Leonardo da Vinci, which was not only celebrating the painting, but was the ultimate masterpiece as a piece of scholarship. It really was exemplary, and its catalogue remains exemplary, as a piece of research around the development of compositions in Leonardo's workshop and their subsequent or concurrent dispersal through or dissemination through workshop variants and through copies. I cannot praise this catalogue enough and recommend it to you, as well, of course, as the extraordinary show that he's going to talk to us about this evening. So over to Vincent de Levin for his paper on Leonardo da Vinci, How to Organize an Impossible Exhibition. Vincent.
Thank you, Scott. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am very honored to be invited tonight to give this lecture. And I would like to thank the Courtauld for this invitation, and especially Dr. Scott Nethersall, who kindly proposed me to present my recent project on Leonardo da Vinci in the Louvre, an exhibition which closed 24th of February 2020. As you said, Scott, just a few days before the lockdown. We were very lucky to be able to open our exhibition for the full period planned, and even have enough time to send back all the loans. I know that many other exhibitions had many problems, were immediately closed just after their opening, or some never opened. So I'm just sad tonight to be here in my apartment, in my flat in Paris, and not to be with you, but I'm afraid that we are getting used with that kind of lecture. I'm sure that in in the forthcoming months, we will be able to be together. So maybe I'll start with showing my PowerPoint. Here it is, and I open it. Should be visible for all of us. So tonight, I would like to give you a general view of the very difficult preparation and organization of the exhibition. I remember that at the beginning of the project, many colleagues, scholars, but also directors from several institutions told us that it was an impossible exhibition. Impossible because nobody will send their Leonardo drawings or paintings, and everybody would have liked to organize something in 2019. So I would like, first, maybe I have to remember that it was an exhibition curated with my colleague Louis Franck from the drawing department of the Louvre, curator of the drawing department of the Louvre. I think it is also very important to remember that this exhibition had been organized to celebrate the artist's death in France 500 years ago in 1519. For the Louvre, it is a very important celebration because when Leonardo died, the three last masterpieces you can see here, St. John, the Saint Anne, and the Mona Lisa, those three last masterpieces he had taken with him in France entered the Royal collection at his death, and this was clearly the great beginning of the Royal collection, which became, with the French Revolution, the national collection today in the Louvre Museum. As you know, each museum has its own personality due to its specific story, and the Louvre is clearly the temple of Leonardo. We have today 5 original paintings by the artist, the 3 paintings you can see here, and 2 others. On your right, the so-called Belle Ferronnière and the Virgin of the Rocks. Both paintings entered the French Royal collection, probably during the 16th century and maybe at the end of the 15th century, still today in unknown circumstances. These 5 paintings represent between the 3rd and the 4th of his complete works. Most scholars attribute to Leonardo between 15 and 20 paintings. It depends on some problematic attributions. To celebrate an historical event could seem a virtuous idea, and it is, but it is also a risky one. Probably, and you won't be the only one who wants to celebrate the anniversary. And this was clearly one of the difficulties of our project, mainly with Italy. At the beginning, we had a specific partnership with Italy. We participated to the great Leonardo exhibition held in Milan in 2015 during the Universal Expo. We lent 2 original paintings. You can see here the facade of the Palazzo Reale in Milan, with the Belle Ferronnière, which was the masterpiece, the poster of the exhibition, drawings and sculpture. And we proposed for the 2019 anniversary to ask for reciprocal collaboration. By the way, we also proposed to send important works by Raphael for a great exhibition in Rome celebrating the artist's death in 2020. But this ambitious partnership turned out to be quite difficult. Several Italian institutions decided to organize their own exhibition on Leonardo in 2019, mainly in Rome, Florence, Torino, Venice. And we had to build a specific partnership with each of these institutions. That is to say, to find reciprocal loans with each museum in Italy. It became also a political problem between the 2 countries, with the opposition of one of the Italian parties, which was at that time part of the government, the Liga. Some members of this party, as Lucia Borgonzoni, who was the Secretary of Culture at that time, started saying that they would refuse all the loans for the Louvre because Leonardo was Italian and had to be celebrated in Italy only. Fortunately, the situation improved in 2019, just a few months before the opening of our exhibition. You can see here an image of the 2nd of May 2019, the day of the celebration of Leonardo's death. It is in the chapel of the Amboise Castle, near the small castle of the Clos Lucé, where Leonardo lived his last years. French President Emmanuel Macron is meditating with the Italian President Sergio Mattarella at Leonardo's grave. This meeting was clearly the beginning of a more peaceful relationship between the two countries. Let's say that the natural rivalry between countries and institutions prompted us to define in a more precise way our exhibition project in order to assure its success. As the Louvre has the greatest part of Leonardo da Vinci's painting, and as we had been restoring and studying these works, it seemed quite natural to focus on Leonardo da Vinci as a painter. So we started asking for loans in 2016. We traveled a lot in all the institutions in order to explain our project to our colleagues and also to consider the possibility to have some loans. You have to know that all masters exhibitions are very difficult to organize today because you ask for all the works which cannot always travel. And when you choose Leonardo, it is even more difficult because his works are very famous and many times they represent the masterpiece of the museum, the star of the museum, which owns it. You can see here, you can imagine us going on your left to the Pinacoteca Ambrosiana in Milan or in Poland, in Krakow, in the National Museum, asking the painting which is on the facade. It is never easy, and at the beginning, it was always a no. So from the beginning, we decided, sure, not to ask the largest and most fragile paintings like the Adoration of the Magi from the Uffizi or the second version of the Vision of the Rock in the National Gallery. They were too large, too fragile, but we decided to ask for all the other works that could possibly travel. Some paintings were refused at the end, and still today, I regret mainly that we couldn't present the Annunciation, which is, in my opinion, the first painting by Leonardo. The Lady with the Ermine was not here also. We had other Milanese projects, so it was less problematic, but still today it was, but we still had the great honor to have in the Louvre the greatest number of Leonardo's paintings ever gathered, 11 works. And you remember that, as I told you already, Leonardo painted between 15 and 20 paintings. So 11 was already a lot. And this success was due to the good relationships we have with our colleagues, because also of natural exchange of works for their exhibitions. And also, I wish so, because many lenders were convinced by the project. In total, we had in the show 160 works, paintings, but also a wonderful selection of his writings and drawings as some masterpieces you can see now, like the Vitruvian Man from Venice or the exquisite study of a head of woman in Torino. So as you understood, the preparation of the Leonardo exhibition was like for us, the two curators, like a nightmare, because we had to deal until the opening with uncertain loans. But in reality, the real and worst nightmare was to master the enormous knowledge on Leonardo da Vinci. As you know, the bibliography on the master is huge, often repetitive and contradictory. But when you are a serious scholar, you have to start with the most objective synthesis on that large and difficult bibliography in order to propose new interesting perspectives. With my colleague Louis Franck, we spent more than 10 years studying the master, because before the decision to organize the exhibition, we already had started studying the master. Louis Franck focused on the study of the archived documents and sources on the artist in order to propose a reliable reconstruction of his life and work. And I must make some advertising on of his critical edition of the life of Leonardo, written by Giorgio Vasari. When you, sorry, well, we have the Italian text, the French translation, and many notes which give you all the documentation you need on each information given by Giorgio Vasari. And this was very helpful to build our project and our catalog. Just one example to prove the importance of revisiting the sources and to really read the archive documents and all the sources linked with a work. In 1503, Leonardo received an important commission of a great mural painting in the Sala Maggiore del Consiglio in the Palazzo della Signoria in Florence. He had to represent the Battle of Anghiari, won by Florence against Milan in 1440. Leonardo started to paint the scene in 1505, but left it unfinished the year later in 1506. And it was covered by a new decoration you can still see today by Giorgio Vasari. Studying the Latin and Italian sources of the historical event, the Battle of Anghiari, allowed Louis Franck to propose the idea that the scene conceived by Leonardo and known only by preparatory drawings and old copies, like the one you see in this moment, well, the theme conceived by Leonardo was possibly a nighttime scene, and the fight for the standard, you can see here, represented by Leonardo, took place at the end of the battle during the night. And this could explain the dark and quite strange light on the painted copies of the battle. We know too, and this one is probably the most faithful. This let us imagine the impressive contrast with the rival composition at the Battle of Cascina, drawn by Michelangelo, who represented daily scene at the middle of the day, just before the fight. So, daily scene, a nighttime scene, and before the fight, after, at the end of the fight. Another exciting part of the scientific preparation was to study the works themselves, in particular, thanks to some conservation treatment. I show you quickly the images of 4 of our paintings before and after restoration. The Saint Anne, it was the first painting restored between 2010 and 12. Then the so-called Belle Ferronnière, 2014-15. The Saint John in 2016. And more recently, between 2017 and 19, a workshop painting, possibly by Francesco Melzi. This is a proposition I made in the catalog. The Saint John transformed during the 17th century into a figure of a Bacchus. During the conservation treatment, we had the great opportunity to study the painting, the material, its condition, and also, which was very crucial for Leonardo, the unfinished parts of the painting. We were also able to make a new scientific investigation on our works, new X-rays, UV, but more important, new infrared reflectography, and something which is really new. We began making that kind of scientific investigation only in 2015, scanning XRF, which is a new powerful elemental imaging technique, which gives you elemental maps of the painting. Both techniques, the infrared reflectography and scanning XRF, helped us to understand in a much better way the long genesis of Leonardo's work, and also they helped us to make new links with preparatory drawings and also old copies done in the master's studio. By the way, this was one of the great discoveries of these years of study, the importance of old copies to understand the original work of the master. I tried to make an inventory of all the copies. They are, as you can imagine, hundreds made after Leonardo's inventions. And I discovered that it was possible to classify them in several families, each one illustrating one step of the project. It is clear that as Leonardo was working quite slowly on his own paintings, copies were made in the studio during that long process and were reproducing a transitional state of the composition. Many times, those copies were crucial to interpret the scientific images, mainly, as I told you, the infrared and the scanner 2D. One example, quickly with the Saint Anne, the reflectography revealed to us the use of a cartoon, which global composition is known thanks to a family of copy, like the one you see on your right, the so-called Resta cartoon, unfortunately disappeared during the Second World War, but we know other copies, which are, by the way, themselves cartoon. So a cartoon, which is a copy of the original cartoon used by Leonardo, and which give you the image of what Leonardo had in mind at the beginning of the pictorial execution. And we continued studying all the copies For example, here we have one interesting copy, which is today in Los Angeles, in which the collaborator of the pupil of Leonardo used some drawings by the master. You can see here for the Virgin's mantle, a drawing used by the collaborator of Leonardo, but a drawing that Leonardo at the end never used in his own painting. And another copy, you see here, it's still the Los Angeles copy, and here the Uffizi copy, in which, and here the reflectography of the Uffizi copy, discovered that the copyist began his copy in the same step as the Los Angeles copy, that is to say, using the wonderful study of drapery you can see here. But he probably saw that Leonardo and understood that Leonardo had changed his mind already, and on top of the former composition, he used a new drawing you can see here. But when he finished his copy, he ignored that Leonardo was going to change a new time his mind, changing, you can see here, the robe of the saint of the same time. And thanks to that, it was possible to propose a new chronology and a new iconographical and formal evolution of the Saint Anne, as you can see quickly here. You can imagine how this information were also crucial for the restoration of the work. As you can see in this image, Cinzia Pasquali, the conservator of the painting, every day when she was touching the painting, had to see the scientific files, the scientific images, but also the old copies to understand some traces on the original painting. Exhibition clearly could benefit from all these findings, not only on the Saint Anne, but on all the composition invented by Leonardo. You remember that I told you that we decided to focus on painting. The main thesis of the exhibition was to reaffirm the great importance of painting for Leonardo. In recent years, some scholars expressed reservations on that point. For them, Leonardo was as much a painter as a scientist, and painting was only one of his activities, maybe not the most important. Sometimes the poor number of paintings done during his long life has even been used as an argument to demonstrate that it was not something as important as we could imagine. In comparison, the great number of drawings encouraged some scholars to think that his imagination flourished mainly during the preparatory process while drawing. The Louvre exhibition wanted to claim clearly the contrary. When reading the writings of Leonardo, mainly those found today in the so-called Libro di Pittura, you understand how important painting was for him. It was the main science, superior to all the other sciences, the divine science based on all the other sciences, mathematics, geometry, anatomy, and astronomy, botany, and many other fields. We think that Leonardo had such a high vision of the art of painting that he preferred to paint just a few paintings which were almost always experimental and many times unfinished, and which required numerous and various scientific researches. The Saint Anne is clearly one of the best examples. For a long time, scholars thought Leonardo spent most of his time between 1501 and 1510-13 thinking on the best composition possible, and then he started at the end to paint something. But the story, to my opinion, is quite different. Thanks to a new document discovered in 2005, a note by Agostino Vespucci writing that in 1503, the master had already started the paintings. So thanks to that document, and also thanks to the scientific examination of the work, we were able to establish that Leonardo spent most of his time thinking on his painting the work the same time, from 1503 until his death in 1590. In the exhibition, we also wanted to give a more consistent vision of Leonardo's life and work, a young man who entered one of the best workshops in Florence in order to become the best painter possible, and who understood that he had to study nature in a global way in order to understand it and to be able to reproduce it in the most perfect way. So to demonstrate that thesis, we decided to create a chronological journey to present in the clearest way possible his evolution, his original method of work, and his incredible singularity in his time. Usually, the artistic life of Leonardo is described in following his geographical move in Italy and France, his use in Tuscany, mainly in Florence between 1452 and 1482, then his installation and stay in Milan between 82 and 1499, then the second stay, the second period in Florence, beginning of 16th century to 1568, and the second Milanese period between 1508 and 13, and then Rome in 1513-16, and then the final period in France from 1516. We could have presented in the exhibition Leonardo's art following these travels in Italy and France, but for us, they do not represent the real breaks in his artistic life. This is why we decided to propose another story with 4 main chapters, which were chronological, but also thematic. Let me present you more specifically each of these sections. The first one was called Shadow, Light, Relief. It was devoted to the artist's use when he decided to become a painter and made his apprenticeship with Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the best masters in Florence during the 1460s and 70s. Verrocchio was initially a goldsmith, but quickly became a sculptor and later a painter. But it was clearly in sculpture that his fame became more important, and he assumed very important commissions as Christ and Saint Thomas, which is probably his masterpiece and one of the greatest masterpieces for all Italian Renaissance sculpture. It was conceived for an outside niche of the Florentine church of San Michele, and Verrocchio imagined a very subtle narration of the gospel. Jesus Christ is slightly behind Saint Thomas, who is turning towards him and approaches his hand to the wounded torso. His movement is more complex than it seems at first sight. The right part of his body is leant towards Jesus, but the left part has just stopped and he seems to go away from Christ. This contradictory movement of the body is also perceptible in his face. The right part seems to smile, but the other one clearly looks sadder. Verrocchio tries to represent the contradictory motions of his mind. Happiness to see his Lord, sadness to have believed in his resurrection only after having seen him. Another essential aspect of the bronze is the exquisite conception of the folds, which seems to repeat the motions of both figures, the regular and equilibrated folds of Jesus' mantle, which express his serenity, his divinity, and the more complex and irregular folds of Thomas' mantle clearly reveal his physical and psychological agitation. On these folds, the play of light and shadow is crucial. They give movement and expression to both figures. Leonardo da Vinci learned a lot looking at this masterpiece in the studio. He discovered how to invent subtle narratives with contradictory movement of the body and mind, and how important was to master the play of light and shadow. Looking at this sculpture, he learned how to give to his paintings a sculptural character, the sensation of 3 dimensions on a flat surface, which was essential in the process of imitation of nature. In the exhibition, we could illustrate this idea with the bronze at the center of the first room, with all around most of the famous series of studies of drapery painted on linen canvases by Leonardo when he was younger with Verrocchio. This series is still today a matter of debate in terms of attribution between the master, Verrocchio, and some of his pupils and collaborators, mainly Leonardo da Vinci and Domenico Ghirlandaio. The display clearly wanted to recreate the spirit of the workshop, the master sculpture at the center of the room, and all around the studies made by the pupil. In this one, the most famous, Leonardo demonstrates a perfect understanding and reproduction of the functioning of light and shadow. What was absolutely spectacular in the exhibition was to see the strong relationship between the depiction of light and shadow in the drapery study and the effect of light in the bronze. probably a more important relationship between bronze and the study on canvas than between the study and clay model. We ask to contemporary artists to conceive a clay model after that famous study, and the play of light of shadow was less similar to the one we could see in the study draperies. So clearly we can imagine that Leonardo for his last study used also had a look at the effect of light on a bronze surface. In this first chapter of the exhibition, we had the great pleasure to expose the first dated drawing, this landscape of Tuscany, drawn when he was 21, a drawing in which we feel his desire to represent the strength and movement of nature, mostly in the trees and the great waterfall you can see at the center. Then in that section, we wanted to show the first independent paintings conceived by the young artist, which was unfortunately impossible for us because at the end, the works couldn't travel. That was a real problem. And we decided to resolve it. We decided to resolve that problem in a specific way with the reproduction of each picture, not a normal picture, but an infrared reflectography of the painting reproduced at the same size as the original, printed on plexiglass and with the back lighting. For us, this was the best way to have in the exhibition the images of all the paintings conceived by the master. The world imagined by Leonardo during his entire life has a great consistency. And I think for us, both creators, it was very important for the public to see that world and to understand that consistency. We also had in the exhibition many preparatory drawings, and it would have been difficult for our public to understand the relationship between the painting without a drawing and a painting without a reproduction. We never wanted normal reproductions in colors because they are, to my opinion, disappointing, even more when displayed near original paintings. In comparison, the infrared reflectography are fascinating images in black and white, which illustrates the master's art in terms of chiaroscuro. But above all, infrared reflectography are essential for a comparison between drawing and painting, as they reveal the underdrawing, that is to say, the first contours drawn by the artist on the preparation of the wood panel. Presentation of the infrared reflectography was a little bit risky, and the decision had even been difficult, or had been accepted with difficulty in the museum, the Louvre Museum. But I think it turned out to be quite successful with the public. First, because I think those images are absolutely wonderful. Their beauty helped a lot, but also because the public was amazed. They had the possibility to discover how we study works of art in museums and what we can learn from these scientific investigations. For example, in the Annunciation, you can see now, the public could see the meticulous preparatory drawing of the architecture, the pavement, the figures. The artist clearly wants to reproduce in the most perfect and precise way all the elements of nature. But this quest for perfection takes him into an art with all the figures still, frozen, with an impassive expression. Even if we discover that he tried to give more movement during the pictorial execution, the visitors could see near the infrared reflectography that preparatory drawing for the arm of the angel, with a ribbon around the drapery. In the drawing, the ribbon falls quietly, like in the underdrawing of the painting. I don't know if you were able to see it, but exactly like in the drawing, the ribbon was really falling really quietly. But at the end, Leonardo decided to give clearly more movement to the figure of the angel. The two other paintings of the young Leonardo, the Madonna of the Carnation and the Ginevra dei Benci, show the same style of the Annunciation, a quest for the perfect form, a meticulous preparation and execution of the work, completely finished execution of the painting, with clearly a wonderful result, but an art still characterized by a reserved movement and expression. In fact, all in all, perfect works of the Quattrocento. What is also already singular in these years of use is that Leonardo doesn't paint much, unlike most of his contemporaries. The second chapter of the exhibition was called Liberty, and it was introduced by two drawings from the end of the 1470s, when Leonardo was about 26 years old. This preparatory drawing for a Madonna and Child, early for the Benoit Madonna in the Hermitage, that drawing demonstrates that at that period, Leonardo wants to represent not only the form of nature and man, but also their physical movement and their feelings. For that, he sought to draw in a new manner. He doesn't try to reproduce precisely the forms of nature, but prefers to capture the physical and psychological movement of the figures. The lines of the drawings are dashed, broken, and often confused, like a scribble. You can see that he reworks to the point that the figures ends up looking like dark and metal shapes. He later theorized this practice for his treatise on painting with the Italian expression of componimento inculto, uncultivated composition. Let me, I think it is interesting, let me read one quotation from his writings. O you who compose stories, do not distinguish with finished contours the members of those stories. Have you never considered how the poets, composing their verses, do not trouble themselves to write beautifully and do not mind crossing out some of those verses, rewriting them better? Therefore, painter, compose roughly the members of your figures. For you will understand that if such an uncultivated composition is appropriate to its invention, so much the more will it satisfy when it is adorned with perfection appropriate to its parts. This is clearly a new manner of drawing, of inventing stories, of reproducing nature, not only in its external form, but also in its internal life and movement. This method of creation is found also at the same moment in his paintings. This was clearly visible in the Adoration of the Magi, started in mostly in the normally, but in the exhibition with the infrared reflectography. That painting was started in 1480 and was left unfinished 2 years later when he left Florence for Milan. The infrared revealed that Leonardo drawn the figures in a freehand manner, like on a sheet of paper, and in some areas, mainly on the right part, you can see here, he superimposed several ideas, creating a very confused form in which he could find the best position. He was the only one to be able for that, to find the best position and movement for his figures. In the exhibition, people could make comparison between the way of drawings on paper, and we had several preparatory drawings near the great infrared reflectography, and it was a nice way to see the similarities between the way of drawing and painting. This new chapter of his artistic life was illustrated by two paintings. First, the Benoit Madonna, which shows a great difference compared to his previous composition of the Madonna of the Carnation. Both compositions look similar at first sight. The group is represented in an interior, a parapet in the foreground, an open window at the back, but the Benoit Madonna is clearly more complex. It is no more a full front presentation of the figures, but a diagonal perspective. And here, the physical and psychological movement of the figures are more intense. The Saint Jerome could show another kind of liberty in his artistic practice. He left it unfinished for more uncertain reasons than the Adoration of the Magi. We know the Adoration of the Magi was left unfinished because he moved from Florence to Milan. For the Saint Jerome, it is still today a matter of problem, a matter of debate. But clearly, that Saint Jerome was the beginning of a new vision of painting as, we could say, an experimental practice. In this section of the exhibition, we exposed the Belle Ferronnière, which was which was chosen as the poster of the exhibition. You know that still today, the identity of the woman remains, unfortunately, a mystery. She is known as the Belle Ferronnière, a famous mistress of the King of France, Francis I, but this is clearly a mistake. She's not French, she's an Italian woman, most probably an important member of the court in Moro, the Duke of Milan, at the end of the 15th century. She's in fact very elegantly dressed, the Spanish manner, which was at that time in fashion in Milan. It has been suggested that she could be one of the Duke Mistral, the wife of his nephew, but as I told you, still today a matter of debate. What is interesting and what we wanted to show in the exhibition near the musician of the Ambrosiana and near also a portrait of Antonello da Messina, which could have been model for Leonardo, we wanted to show how Leonardo decided to abandon the traditional composition profile, which was clearly dominant at the court of Milan. Leonardo prefers a more lively composition with the figure in a movement of rotation in front of us. The bust is seen between profile and three-quarter. The face is almost face-on, and the eyes look slightly towards our right. The master wants to represent the model in a physical movement, which is also a psychological movement. The third chapter of the exhibition was called Science. It showed that during the 1480s, Leonardo understood that if he wanted to reproduce nature in the most perfect manner, he had to study it in a scientific manner. And this is when he started to investigate our world, all its components, as you can see in this wonderful drawing from the Royal Collection, which was the introduction of the section in the exhibition. We have many kind of fields that interested Leonardo da Vinci, and I think that was the best introduction, a dream introduction. You can see here the three tables we had in that section, which aimed to recreate the atmosphere of the workshop with the master writing his scientific studies on his books. Visitor could see studies on many fields, mathematics, geometry, you can see here, optics, on the Earth also, the famous Codex Leicester with the problem of the distance between Sun and Earth, the famous study on the Moon, also on nature, geology, many things on botany, mainly from the Royal Collection, which was very generous with us. Also problem of hydraulics, anatomy, and also the human proportion with the famous Vitruvian Man, but also the world of animals, mainly bird flights. In the exhibition, we wanted to show these scientific drawings linked with the artistic works in order to remind the public that for the master, for Leonardo, science was not separated from art. He was fascinated by science, but he never forgot painting. Science was a way to painting. His writings for a treatise on the art of painting, he explains that painting is based on science. He used the expression of the divine science of painting. And painting was for him the supreme science, but even more important was for him the pictorial execution, because during the pictorial execution, during the execution, the artist becomes like a god, recreating nature. And this is what we understood while studying and restoring the Saint Anne or the Saint John. These works were conceived slowly in search for perfection and with the most refined pictorial execution. Since his youth, Leonardo looked at Flemish paintings done with oil, and during his long life, he improved his technique in order to create a refined effect of what we call sfumato, these imperceptible transitions between light and shadow, to give an impression of vibration to the painting, which gives life to the figure. Sfumato can be compared with the componimento in culto in drawings. In drawings, the perfect form, the contours, are violently denied by the practice of the componimento in culto. In the paintings, the sfumato effect dissolves the contours in a more subtle and refined way, but it is quite similar intellectually. This conception of painting led him to become the main artist of his time, the pioneer of what the contemporary called the modern manner. And this was the fourth chapter of the exhibition we simply called, because Leonardo was in fact the first to reproduce perfectly life, perfectly nature, not only in its external forms, but also its internal strengths, its movement, and the complex human feelings. The fourth chapters, as you can see, started with the display of the oldest copy of the Last Supper from Milan. As you can imagine, the original one cannot travel. And this copy opened the last chapter, the Last Supper clearly opens the last chapter of Leonardo's artistic evolution at the end of the 1490s. As you understood, in the exhibition, we proposed three main chapters in Leonardo's artistic development. His use during the 1470s in search for the perfection of form, then an experimental period in drawing and painting from the end of the 70s to the end of the 90s, and finally, from the Last Supper to his death, his complete maturity. In the Last Supper, I won't be able to explain all his composition from his maturity, as you can imagine, but in the Last Supper, he clearly demonstrates his ability to reproduce the human movement and feeling with perfection, strength, and subtlety. During his last 20 years, between 1419 and his death in 1519, Leonardo continued on that way, and we were able, in the exhibition, to present all the composition he invented during that period. The first decade was particularly prolific. He started several new compositions he kept with him for many years, and he regularly perfected them in their form, their meaning, and their pictorial execution. We could show his accomplishment in different genres, as the portrait, clearly with the Mona Lisa. We could show only the infrared reflectography, the Mona Lisa, which is a portrait in which he takes several ideas from a previous composition by other artists, like the columns on the side, a large window with the landscape at the back, the clasped hands. But all these previous ideas are, with Leonardo, no more formal codes, but they are presented all in a more natural way, with the lady depicted in a natural scale, seated in a kind of loggia in a palace, while she's turning towards us, as if she was welcoming us with a delicate smile. We could show also the interesting case of the Yad-Wonder Madonna, conceived for a French patron, Florimond Robertet, probably in 1499. Two main, as you know, two main versions exist, done in the studio, and they show the same changes in the infrared reflectography with the basket of spindles and a scene with a saint family with Jesus in a baby walker. Those ideas were progressively dilated at the end for a more synthetic iconography focused on the physical and psychological movement of Mary and Jesus, on their meditation on the future death of Jesus announced by the Yad-Wonder, the symbol of the cross. The presentation of these works in the show was also interesting in terms of attribution, as both paintings are still at the center of a debate. In my opinion, the scientific investigation proved that the underdrawing of the so-called Lansdowne version, the one you can see on your left, the Lansdowne version had an underdrawing similar to the one we find in original paintings, but this was not the case for the Buccleuch Madonna, which presents a mechanical underdrawing, clearly done by someone in the studio. However, the pictorial execution of the Lansdowne painting shows in different areas at the figures a different technique compared to Leonardo's original works. On the other hand, the Beclou painting on the right shows some areas of a very subtle sfumato comparable with Leonardo. All in all, two paintings clearly painted in the studio, and with some participation of the master at different stages. We could present also the project of the Battle of Hungary. Already spoke a little bit on that, and mission given by the Florentine Republic to Leonardo in 1503. Project for Great Wall mural for the rivalry with Michelangelo. Several sketches were presented, those kind of componimento in culto drawings, and also wonderful studies of expression for some soldiers of the battle. Maybe, and also old copies of that very important composition, the most important with the Last Supper, and maybe related to the Florentine Republic, the composition of the Salvator Mundi was also present in the exhibition. Still today, the circumstances of its creation remains uncertain. To my opinion, the dating of the preparatory drawings you can see here invites us to place its birth in Florence at the beginning of the 16th century, when Leonardo was living there around 1503-5. You have to remember that the Salvator Mundi was an important iconography of the Florentine Republic at the same time. In the exhibition was presented a nice, very nice, important workshop version, the so-called Gannet version, the most famous one, as you all know, never arrived in the show. But we probably speak too much today on that composition, which is clearly not the most interesting, innovative, and personal composition of Leonardo. Leonardo who remained respectful of the iconographic tradition. More interesting, to my opinion, were his project for a mythological painting of Leda. There we ignore if the master started an original painting. There was one Leda in the French Royal Collection, disappeared at the end of the 17th century. For some scholar, Leonardo never painted an original. For other, has been we don't know. We only have today copies. In the exhibition, we could compare Leonardo's drawing with probably famous antique sculptures, which were clearly a model for him. For his first idea version of Leda, a kneeling Leda, you could see here, with wonderful sketches. Started with black chalk, and we worked with pen and ink. They are impressive illustration of his complemento in culto method of creation. And we could show also the relationship between the standing Leda with the Praxitelian Venus. Another very important point, to my opinion, in this show was, after the Saint Jerome, the problem of the Saint Jerome, to confront the visitor to the problem of the unfinished, the non finito. It is still today a difficult aspect of Leonardo's art, which remains a matter of debate, as Leonardo never wrote something on that point. For some of his first works, at the Adoration of the Magi, it has been said rightly that the unfinished state of the work could be explained by the fact that he abandoned Florence for Milan, neglecting the commissions. But it is clearly a different situation in the last part of his life. On that problem, we showed first the Scapigliata, an amazing unfinished study of a woman's head. The image has been associated with the project of the Leda, but more recently, Carmen Bambach has proposed the attractive hypothesis that it could be a recreation of the famous Venus left unfinished by the Greek antique painter Apelles when he died. Bambach uses, maybe some of you know, the account of Agostino Vespucci, a Florentine who knew Leonardo, and compared Leonardo to Apelles, and as Apelles as Leonardo used to let his work unfinished. The Scapigliata clearly rises to the question of a deliberate and finished state, the non finito in Leonardo's art. But the non finito reappears in a more subtle manner in the Saint Anne and in the Saint John, where there are parts of exquisite pictorial execution next to other just sketches. The non finito seems obviously the result of a perfectionist pictorial experiment which never ends. But we could bet that if Leonardo had lived 10 years more, both painting at the Saint Anne and the Saint John would have been slightly different and still unfinished. But the Non Finito seems to be also a specific taste of Leonardo for forms in gestation. And we can suspect his special awareness of the poetic strengths of some areas left unfinished near other finished, like in several of his Componimento in Culto drawings. In the execution, we wanted to demonstrate that these last paintings were a sort of legacy of all his scientific and artistic skills. Both paintings, clearly with the Mona Lisa, were the most refined paintings of all his works. The one where he uses the extraordinary effect of sfumato in the most perfect way. This is sfumato created with this imperceptible transition between light and shadow, a sfumato that achieves to give life to the figures. In the Saint Anne, the sfumato is essential for Leonardo's purpose, as he tries to represent the transitional moment during which the Virgin understands that she can't oppose to Jesus' destiny and that his death will be the salvation. And this explains the contradictory movement of the Virgin. She suddenly stops to keep Jesus far from the Lamb, it's a symbol of his death, and she starts to support him. The same contradictory expression is visible on her face between sadness and happiness. You can see the strong relationship with the first work. The Saint Anne was the last masterpiece in the exhibition, with a clear relationship with the first masterpiece on display in the exhibition, the St. Thomas of Verrocchio. Maybe it's already 7, it's already quite late, and I think I said all the most important thing. Maybe just a few things on the, clearly we couldn't show the third masterpiece in the exhibition, the Mona Lisa. The exhibition space in the Louvre is not enough. You know that for the visit, it's not enough large for the Mona Lisa's public, as she usually receives daily about 30,000 visitors. So we only showed in the painting, in the exhibition, the infrared reflectography, and maybe because it's something you can see also at home normally. We had a virtual reality tour, which goal was to explain the refined composition. It was an experience of 5 minutes and just after the visit of the exhibition. So maybe I should stop here. And if you have some question, I will be happy to answer if I can.
Thank you so much, Vincent. That was an extraordinarily stimulating and rich lecture. One in which you were, well, incredibly honest with us at the beginning about the political difficulties involved in the show, but also one in which you've outlined a different way of conceiving of the Oeuvre that was represented through the show, as much as a kind of a masterclass in what can be achieved when technological or scientific investigation of paintings is combined with rigorous pictorial research and rigorous documentary research. And the results are really thrilling in many ways. So congratulations on the show and on its catalogue. Just to say, anyone who is listening at this point, if you have questions, please put them into the chat and I will read them out to Vincent. But I'd like to start with some of my own, if you don't mind. I want to start where you finished with the Non Finito and say that the point you make about the fact that the reasons why paintings are unfinished in his Oeuvre clearly differs across his Oeuvre, and that makes a lot of sense. But there seems to me to be an interesting contradiction between, say, something that like the Non Finito in the Saint Anne and all these workshop copies or copies by pupils which are highly finished. And I wonder if you have any way of explaining that. I mean, is Leonardo actively using the workshop in a sense to finish his compositions, or is it just rather more random that people are seeing it at a certain point and therefore finishing it in the state that they saw it? I mean, do you think he's using the workshop as a way of almost imagining what it would look like finished in that sort of state?
Well, clearly this is one possibility, I think. Well, first, we can suspect that sometimes the copies were also done for financial reasons. Mm-hmm. And so as the original were never finished, something was going out from the workshop. But it is clear that I suspect that the studio version of the, for example, of the Satan, but also of the it could be said for Saint John, could have been used by Leonardo to see how some of his ideas could be good or not for his own painting. For example, he drawn that wonderful study of a drapery for the Virgin's mantle, which is a study I show you, which is in the Louvre. And at the end, he never used that drawing, which we can find in most of the copies done in the studio. So other drawings done at the same period were used by Leonardo for his own painting. So clearly, he made a selection between his new ideas. Some all were taken by in the studio by his pupils for their own copies, but for his own original, which was clearly also probably an experimental work, I imagine, he only selected some and not others. So it is difficult.
It's dynamic, yeah.
I don't know if I answered to all your...
No, you absolutely did. Let's move to some of the questions that are appearing in the chat. One person has asked, and you might feel you don't want to answer this, but more about the Salvator Mundi, which they said, as you said, that a copy was displayed in the exhibition. But this person says they'd heard the book or booklet about the record-breaking painting was briefly on sale in the Louvre exhibition shop. So can you say any more about how the Louvre was involved and why it didn't appear in the exhibition? You might not be able to answer that, but the question is there.
So maybe you asked me why the painting was not in the Louvre. Huh? That's
yes, exactly.
That's I would like to know also. We asked the owner to have the painting exhibition, and it has been a long discussion. And at the end, it was his decision to keep it and not to send it to the Louvre. Still today, I don't have a definitive idea on that point. Several things have been said on the press, and some probably true. Other, as you can imagine, there is also a political and diplomatic part on that subject, and unfortunately, maybe one day when I will retire, I will write all the true story, what I know on the Salvator Mundi. But at the end, I mean for our project, our exhibition project, as I think that the Salvator Mundi is an interesting composition, and the painting we didn't have is an interesting painting, clearly an interesting painting, but it is clearly not the most innovative and most personal composition of Leonardo da Vinci. So what we had to say on Leonardo in the exhibition was said thanks to all the other works we had. The Salvator Mundi compared, for example, to Saint John, is clearly it is clearly not a painting which illustrates in the best way the importance of Leonardo da Vinci as an artist, I think. So it was not at the end a big problem for our show. It's a pity because it would have been interesting to have that painting near original works and near studio version, mainly the nice Gannet version, which is really a high level workshop version done in the studio. So it's a pity, but it's like that.
Okay, there are a series of follow-up questions that are coming through, but you might, we should probably move on from the Salvator Mundi. So someone's asked if you think it is definitely the work of him. Another person has asked about whether or not you feel your work as a curator at the Louvre is political work or if it's purely art historical. But I think you might feel we want to move on from these, and we'll
well, first, my job is scientific, historical, but you know, with Leonardo, this is a problem of Leonardo. It becomes always something different. There are economical problems when you ask for private paintings which are on private hands. There is clearly a financial problem behind it. It's also a political problem when you ask an important painting to a country with which France is not always with which France doesn't have a good relationship. That's life with you understand what I'm saying. That's when you work on Leonardo, you have to deal with that. So it's part of it's another part of a job, and you have to deal with that. That's also part of. But mainly, and I prefer to do that, researchers and historical researchers. And what I think of Salvator Mundi, there are French laws. We can't do real expertise on paintings from which are still on private hands. And still today, the famous Salvator Mundi, it's still not today a clear thing. So today, I can't really say what I think of the painting, but I try in the catalog to publish what we know about it. And I think today many things has been done on the paintings, and the London exhibition has got many arguments have been given, and clearly that famous painting has many qualities which makes him an important work, and I wish it will be in the forthcoming months, years, visible to a general public with clear scientific and new investigations done in order to help scholars and the public to have a clearer idea on the painting. This is what my wish.
Thank you very much. We'll take you away from the Salvator Mundi now. One of the members of the audience has said, "Thank you, Vincent, for insisting on incorporating into the exhibition the IR reflectograms on an equal footing as the painting themselves. This is a truly groundbreaking museological development, which I hope more museums all over the world will follow." So great compliment, but also to turn that into a question. Was that? I wondered when I saw the show whether or not that was partially practical. That if the Annunciation was Lent, you could sort of substitute it in because it was sort of the same scale, or was it always your intention always to have the IRs for everything?
Sorry, maybe the Annunciation, if the painting was going to be there, we were supposed to, where we had the infrared reflectography, it was supposed to be the wall for the painting, and the infrared reflectography would have been just after where we put with too much space the preparatory drawings. So we had to move all that at the last moment. With the Leonardo exhibition, it was really the installation was the display was a nightmare, because even in terms of architecture, we had to take a decision until the last moments because of the Annunciation, because of the Salvator Mundi and some other drawings and paintings. But well, that's but at the end, during the installation, we had to take the final decision, and it was on like that. This clearly was the lack of the exhibition, to my opinion, was one of the painting from the use of Leonardo to see those exquisite finished works of art. But that's life.
I personally thought it was particularly thrilling seeing the drawings beside the underdrawings. Was really wonderful. We're getting some other comments about it. Somebody's asking if you could speak more about the internal pushback you received from proposing using the infrared reflectograms rather than the actual paintings. Why was there resistance to doing it?
Well, first, because I think we were at that moment still not used showing images in the Louvre. It's like a law. We only show originals. If, for example, if for your demonstration you need a drawing which cannot travel because it had been lent to another exhibition previously, if you absolutely need it, you can't show. You will not be able to show a facsimile of the drawing. There is really that. We only have to show to our public original works. So the idea to show pictures of all the paintings was clearly the first problem for not only the direction but also with many colleagues from many departments. The other problem was those images are infrared reflectographies. the general public is not used to interpret that kind of images, and many colleagues told me, well, you know, it's not going to work. Nobody will understand. It's too difficult. You can't show that. It's a bad idea, and it's going to be a chaos. Nobody will understand what you want to. It's only something for scholars, for specialists, and not for a general audience. So we had really to fight to prove how, for several reasons, I tried to present to you how it was important. And at the end, even in the museum, our president, but also many of our curators were impressed by that. First, because we take care about how the display of those infrared reflectography with those printings on plexiglass and with the backlighting, which clearly reproduce the kind of experience you have when you see infrared reflectography on your computer. And those images are so, they're so beautiful. I remember that visiting the exhibition with some artists, some told me that they want to use that kind of images for their creation. You know that, for example, X-rays had been already used by some artists, and I think now also artists will use infrared reflectographies. And at the end, visiting many times the exhibition and trying to hear and to see what the general public were, how their feelings in front of the reflectography, I saw great curiosity. So many times they were trying to interpret them, to read the under drawing, to make comparison with the preparatory drawings. Clearly, when it is the first time when you see that kind of scientific investigation, it's difficult. But I think it is our task to confront our public to those images. It's important, and I think the public was amazed, and they like to go behind the scene to see how a painting is conceived, is done. In fact, so it has been at the end a success.
Personally, I found them absolutely wonderful. There's a question taking us away from the infrared, where someone says, did you feel that you were fighting against all the popular interpretations of Leonardo? So this person says, he is so omnipresent from The Simpsons to ghastly films that it is sometimes difficult to uncover the man and indeed the artist. Your exhibition seemed more scholarly and serious than more recent exhibitions. So did your audience find this difficult, or is the question?
No, well, maybe I remember that for some it was a surprise, because for our part of our general audience, and I have to say French audience, they were expecting to find all the inventions of Leonardo. So Leonardo as an inventor, for them, it's something very important. And so I remember that even in our, I don't know the name in English, Le Livre d'Or, the golden book, you know, where you make all at the end of the exhibition, you write what you thought on the exhibition. So some people were surprised that the painting was so important, even if they know that he painted the Mona Lisa clearly, but even except that, it was quite a discovery that painting was as important as we try to explain in the exhibition. After in the press, we had, even if we, in our exhibition, we try to be serious, we had still to be confronted with many strange ideas and really stupid hypotheses. But that's Leonardo, so that's part of the myth of Leonardo. We can fight, but the battle is you never totally win the battle. So scholars have, historians of art have to fight, but it's difficult. It's difficult.
Well, and we're coming to an end, so I'm going to again assert my privilege to ask the final question, and that is to ask you about your decision to think about structuring the Oeuvre in a different way. So rather than thinking of it structured around his movements up and down the peninsula, to think about it as a period of perfection of form up to the 70s and the late 70s, about experimentation through to maturity. How has this been received as a set of ideas? Have you heard from what many scholars have thought about it, or how has it been the reviews dealt with it?
Well, colleagues were probably too kind, and during my visit with them, well, as we have been speaking so much on the works themselves, maybe we couldn't have that kind of general discussion all around. So still today, and you remember that just after the closure of the exhibition, lockdown and no more communication. So unfortunately, I don't have a lot of I don't know about too much about that. But I think for scholars, for the general public, it was a way to focus on the artistic development of Leonardo more than on the context of the creation. The Adoration of the Magi made for a specific church in Florence, the Virgin of the Rocks made for a specific confraternity in Milan. It's important to know it, sure, clearly. But I think for the public to understand the artistic evolution of Leonardo, it is my opinion, it was clearer to focus on the great breaks in his artistic maturation, and not to focus on his stay, the context of the creation, the context of Florence, of Milan, of Rome, which are important clearly for the patronage of his paintings. But I think these movements and they hide part of the evolution of and we can't focus on the real breaks of his artistic evolution, and the aim of the exhibition was clearly to show the long artistic life of Leonardo da Vinci. So it was easier, and 4 chapters, you know, when maybe it's for a French public, but we need to have not too many chapters. 6, 7, 8 chapters is too much. For general, it's easier to understand what you want to explain.
Well, thank you very much on that note and that incredible synthesis of his entire work. It remains for me to thank you very hugely for a very illuminating lecture. For something that was so much more than just telling us about an impossible exhibition, but really was a full exploration of Leonardo the painter. Thank you very much, Marcel.
It was a great pleasure. Next time in London, I wish.
I do hope so. Please come and see us in London.
Goodbye.
Bye.